All right, so good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Plant 3D User Community Meetup for August. My name is Jason Drew, and our co-host today is Joel Harris. So give just a few seconds here for everyone to connect and get signed into GoToMeeting. Sorry, GoToWebinar. So just a few quick points here. Please try to keep your line muted to reduce the background noise. If you have any questions, you can use the questions box as part of the client here to type those in. If you have any issues with the actual presentation, you can type those into the chat window and those will come into me and Joel here. We'll keep an eye on those through the session. This is recorded, record these sessions, and then we post them up on our YouTube playlist. So I just wanted to give you a notice that these will be recorded. So just kind of give a brief intro about myself. My name is Jason Drew. I'm a designated support specialist here with Autodesk, and I provide technical support to our enterprise customers and the Autodesk communities on the products listed here. I was previously in IT support for about 10 years before getting into the oil and gas industry with P&ID design. Did that for about 3 years. And then moved on to the Autodesk Plant Design Solutions products. And I've been here with Autodesk for about 8 years now in my support role here. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Joel. I could do his intro as well.
Thanks, appreciate that, Jason. So yeah, I'm also designated support specialist. Jason and I work together and we support a lot of the similar products down below. Before I joined Autodesk 6 years ago, I was in the oil and gas business as a piping designer up here in Washington State. And then prior to that, actually was doing AutoCAD development and was a reseller. So been doing the AutoCAD thing for a few years now and really enjoy doing these sessions. So look forward to the presentation today, and I'll be manning the Q&A box while Jason's presenting. So.
All right, thanks, Joel. So just kind of go over an agenda for today. We'll have an overview of these sessions and kind of give you an idea of what these are about. If this is the first time you've joined, we'll have a little bit of Plant 3D news. Then the theme for this session is project units. So we'll be talking about that, how it impacts the projects, parts, and catalogs, things of that nature. Go through any questions from last month, and then we'll have some open discussion and Q&A towards the end. So what we're talking about today is basically an overview of the project units for Plant 3D projects, and then we'll talk about how those impact as you're building catalogs and putting those parts into spec sheets, and then just some general best practices, things to know about using Imperial metric parts in a project together. So these sessions here are basically intended to be a casual engagement. We hold these once a month, and we'll have a small portion with news and information, and then the rest of the session towards the end is more general discussion around the products and workflows. So anything that you'd like to bring up question-wise, we encourage you to jump in there either in the chat window in the questions, or we can do live Q&A. If you raise your hand through the GoToWebinar, we can unmute you and you can answer those live. And then going over to our safe harbor statement that we put up here, this kind of legal statement. So we're just putting this up here because some sessions we talk about planned or future development efforts for the products and services. And we just want to make sure that you don't use those as for kind of like business decisions, as those, dates are subject to change, things of that nature. Always make sure that the availability of the products and services are there. Check with your account team before using those or planning to use those on an active project. So just going into some of the news here, the one thing we wanted to highlight that we're getting some questions about and looking at is the new workflows with BIM 360 projects, basically coordination projects on BIM 360. And so now you have the option with Plant 2021 going over to the Docs platform as opposed to Teams before. That opens up some possibilities for using something like the BIM 360 model coordination, which is a cloud-based method for viewing the drawings that you have in the project and even running some clash detection and things like that. So in the past, previously, you were kind of limited on where you could pull those models from. They had to be in the plans folder, which is a little bit higher in the structure there, and now they've opened it up to where you can actually point that coordination space into the project file section. And just want to kind of do a quick demo of what this looks like. So I'm just going to bring this browser window over here. Now this is a BIM 360 project that I basically have uploaded a Plant 3D project into. So if I go up here to the menu, you can see I've got document management, some other modules in here. Model coordination is one of those, and that's what we'll kind of take a look at here in a moment. But document management is where your project goes when you share that up to the cloud. So if I go in here, you'll see that I have a folder under project files that is the just the sample project that comes with Plant. So this folder here is basically the project itself. It's the drawings, the template files, XMLs, everything else, etc. And the actual project database is stored up in the cloud as well. You don't really see that here. It's not really visible from within Docs. But these are all the project files. And what I've done in here is if I go into the project administration, I've set up what's called a coordination space. So basically, if I go in here to model coordination and do the settings for this particular module, I can create a coordination space, and basically you just tell it where, give it a name and tell it where the files are. So I pointed to the project files to this particular project folder, and so that's where it's looking for the models, and I've pointed it down to my Plant 3D models folder. Now some examples, you could have this pointed out to a folder, say where you have your final check drawings or things that have been taken through a process of a model check and that nature and stored in there. Basically, you can put it wherever you want. So once you set that up, and I go back over here to model coordination, that's going to automatically see or detect the changes that are happening with drawings as they're saved in the project and synchronized. And these are all the models here. So you can view these just individually. If you want to use the web browser, you can go into clashes. For example, it runs this automatically. This is kind of a clash matrix between the drawings, across the top and along the side, and you can kind of see what it's picking up on. And it does check these periodically, or when you initially upload the drawings, those go in here and get checked. So this is a little bit different than Navisworks, similar process for clash detection. But what's nice is you can go in here and look at the clashes and how they're grouped together here. So maybe if I want to go in and look at the steel drawing for area 2 against the pipe, if I click on this, it's going to bring up the list of clashes that it finds in here. So I'll take a second for it to load these models. So basically what it's doing is it's just giving me a view of both these models together, this pipe rack and all the piping. It's going to show me between the drawings. If I want to look between the steel and the pipe where there's clashes, I can click in here and see those, and I can also highlight those all together and see those in the model kind of lit up between green and red. So kind of focusing on piping, if I go in here and click on one of these and branch it down, it shows me there's an issue with this connector between the steel beam here. So it's picking up on kind of like the gasket for that valve, and that's showing me that there's a problem there. So what you can do with these, if I wanted to say issue this as a problem for someone to check in and look at that, I could click this button here, click the issue button, and then that's going to allow me to assign this to somebody on the project. I could add some location data in here. For example, if I had all this set up with the areas and units, things like that, put in a root cause, and I can actually assign this to somebody to go in and work on. You can put titles in here. I could put notes. I could select the date, kind of like a due date when I need this done and resolved. And then basically what I would do is I would just create this, and then it would notify the person that I've assigned this to. It's going to basically move that over to the assign tab. So now that's listed as an issue in here, and basically I can go back and look at those, and then whoever's assigned to it would take a look at that and resolve the problem, and then mark it resolved, and I would get notified that that's done. So just kind of a nice method there that you can use with your collaboration projects. You'll need to have the model coordination module enabled in there and turned on, and then set up the coordination space in order to utilize that.
Jason, can I interject that? That's really cool that
Yeah.
you showed that. I've been playing with that myself, and one of the things that you can do is set up reviews so that like a one-step or two-step or multi-step review to actually copy the files over to that coordination space. So it's sort of official and tracked inside BIM 360. And then there's also the new beta that's out for Navisworks, where you can actually review and edit the issues in Navisworks desktop connecting to that coordination space in BIM 360. So it's kind of a cool extension of what we normally do right now as piping designers. I say we, but those are the good old days where you were working with Navisworks and Plant 3D models, and you're doing it all on your network and moving files to places where you have NWFs referencing them and such, and seeing those now still with the same tools but in the cloud, doing the processing and the management of issues is kind of neat. So,
And that
thanks.
connection with Navisworks, that's still in beta, right? I haven't really got a
Yeah,
chance to
it
look at it
is.
myself.
It is still in
Okay.
beta, but it's been in beta for, time is stretched during a pandemic, so it's been in beta for a couple months. So hoping to see that come out soon.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for noting that. That's a good new feature there to connect with a desktop Navisworks with BIM 360 here. So we'll kind of go here to the main topic here with Plant 3D project units. We'll kind of do an overview here. For anyone that hasn't really gone through project setup, just want to kind of note this is what you'll get when you first create a project, the options you have. So two settings here overall. You have Imperial, which means that all the unit properties are going to be reported in inches, and that's just kind of like we'll call it like a straight Imperial project where everything's going to be, all the content's going to be Imperial, so you'd use that option. If you're doing more of a metric or a mixed metric type of project where everything's going to be reported, or most of the things are going to be reported in millimeters, then maybe you have some Imperial content in there as well. You could do what's called a mixed metric project where the nominal diameters for the Imperial content will be reported in inches. So if you're setting a project, just make sure you get this set ahead of time based on the type of content you're going to use. And that way you have everything ready to go from the start there. And what's important to set that is at the beginning is you really can't change the project units after a project's created. It's kind of set in the project itself, and there's really no way to go back and modify that just out of the box. And as far as drawing unit compatibility, so for example, if you created an Imperial project, but you figured out that maybe you needed to do mixed metric, there'll be kind of an issue with that because you can't really copy Imperial drawings that were created in an Imperial plant project over to mixed metric or metric. Now, if it's metric or mixed metric, those will copy in across projects just fine. But the Imperial, since the units are kind of baked into the DWG file, it has no way to kind of convert those over, and you can only copy Imperial drawings into other Imperial projects as well. And looking at the units, so depending on what you select for the project, these are the units it's going to assign by default. Of course, you have the decimal type, and then on the links for metric and mixed metric, and the insertion scales millimeters, so it scales the content properly. And then Imperial is going to be architectural type on the length, and then you have the insertion scale of inches, once again for the content to come in properly from the catalogs. Now, one thing I wanted to note here is the units command for drawing. So the units command, if you type that in, it's just going to bring up and show you what the current setting is. And that really controls the display of the units. So what you see in properties palette and things like that. Drawing units is a different command, and that's actually can act like a conversion tool, and it can be a little bit dangerous. So I want to note that I can change things in the project. But if I go into Plant 3D here and just kind of show really quickly, let me drag this over here. Grab that screen, if it'll come over. There we go. So if I go into, this is a metric project here, and I just look at by default, this is set up to display pipe. And as far as the cut length and things like that, that's all going to be by default in just millimeters. But if I go into the units command and say I want to change that, I could set this over to architectural, and of course it wants me to put this to inches or it's going to give me a warning. So I'll just set that. And then when I go in and look, it's going to change what I'm seeing in the properties palette or what it's kind of reporting also down here in the coordinates. And of course that's not 153 foot pipe, but it's not scaled. This is still in metric units here, but it's changing the display. So that's what the units command is doing there. Not really modifying anything in the drawing, just changing how it's displaying those. So I'll put this back to millimeters. Now, if I was to do the DWG units command, this is where it gets a little bit different as far as what it's doing. So if I switch this over to, let's say I do want to change it to inches, and I'll do architectural. We'll just keep the precision format here the same. And then if I say, okay, do you want to scale these for other drawings upon insert? So scale objects, that's the insertion factor there. Keep that yes, and then I'll go ahead and match the insertion units there. Actually, I think I have to save this first. I did this earlier. But if you change this, it's going to want to scale. So let me do DWG units. And we'll change this back to something else here. And it should ask me, here we go. So it's saying, hey, you changed the units for the drawing database. Are you sure you want to do this? Do you want to scale the objects? And if I go ahead and select yes here, it's going to actually change these, ask me if I want to do it in paper space as well. I'll just say yes. It's going to go through and scale. So obviously this is thrown off a bit. You know, my objects have all been scaled into the drawing. So that does physically change things in the drawing. So just be aware that drawing units command is different than actually just using the units command there. So I can undo and go back, put it back to where it was there. So just want to point that out, the difference between those two commands, and they are just regular AutoCAD commands there. The other thing I want to talk about here is units for catalogs and specs. So as you're going through and building out a catalog for a project, you need to kind of understand how the units work with the parts. And so those are proper when they go into a spec sheet and for use in a drawing. And the two types of parts that you'll have, there will either be parametric, which are dimension-driven shapes. These are templates that are baked into the catalogs to drive the shape for, say, a valve or an elbow. And those are the dimensions you put in, and then the scripts drive the actual creation of the geometry in the model. And the other type that you would have is a 3D block-based graphic, where you're actually taking an AutoCAD block. Maybe you have a third-party vendor that's giving you some of the 3D blocks, and you're going to convert those over to either valves or inline objects and things like that. So those are considered block-based, and the units will come into play with those as well. So talking about the parametric parts, or the shapes that we have there out of the initial catalogs, the main thing you'll need to do here is define your units when you're creating a new part. So depending on whether or not you select Imperial or metric up here and set your size ranges, that's going to write into the part itself in the actual catalog. If you were to go in and look at a catalog, which is just a SQLite database, you can see we have these linked units in here. You also have a port unit for the actual points of connection there for like a flange or the end of a valve. That's driving what Plant's looking at to see if that's a Imperial or a metric component. So that's what it's setting there when you select that option and you're creating your part initially. The other setting that to look for in here within Catalog Editor is the units that you're editing in. So basically there's an option in there where you can edit in Imperial units or metric units, and that's really driving what you're going to see as you're editing those parts in there. So our recommendation is to try to keep the same unit type for a catalog of parts, just to kind of keep things sorted and easy to maintain. And just to kind of see what this looks like, if I go in here and open up, say, you know, a valve catalog, the DIN valves catalog, which is metric. I'm currently editing in metric units, but if I go over here and change this and say I want to edit in Imperial units, you can see these convert over. So give me the Imperial equivalent if I wanted to type them in that format. And then if I go back to editing in metric, it will switch back over to the default for this catalog, which is metric. So that's something you can change there as you're editing. But typically you'll be creating the parts, you know, metric parts for metric catalog and Imperial for Imperial catalogs. Just a couple of quick tips here that we want to point out. These are some things we run into often and just to kind of help you. The number one tip here, before you create a new part or you click that create new part button in Catalog Editor, make sure you clear your filters. I've done this several times myself where I've been filtering for parts and go, oh, I need to add another part, and I just immediately click the create component button, go through the process of setting that up. What happens is these windows up here, or these panels up here, become blank because it's basically filtering on one part type, and what you're creating up here may not be that exact same part. So if these are blank, just go ahead and go back, hit the clear filter button, start over, and then you'll have the ability to edit that part. So it's something we've reported to the product team to take a look at that, see if we can get that resolved. But it is one of those things you have to think about, and a little bit confusing the first time it happens. I know it happened to me. I had to figure out what was going on there, and it was just the fact that I had a filter turned on. I was trying to edit there. The other thing I wanted to mention is that when you initially create a part, at least with parametric parts, the dimensions that come in are just default. So make sure that you check all those when you're creating a part. You go through and just double check each of these values, because if you don't, you miss one, you may have one part there that's scaled, you know, way far off. This is just kind of a default set that comes in for whichever part type you select. But make sure you go through all of those. whether it's Imperial or metric parts, and just check all those and double check them before you save to the catalog. And you'll need to do that for each part size as well. If you populate the list of parts over there, each one of those you need to go through and set those. And the other option would be, if you have a large number of parts to create, you could use catalog builder, where you would export your catalog out to Excel, fill in these values in bulk, and then import them back in, let it build a catalog for you. So this is just kind of a tip if you're editing individual parts in the catalogs. Getting into block-based parts where you're using actual an AutoCAD drawing that has 3D blocks in there. One thing to watch out for is the once again, the units here, the insertion scale, and then the settings on your block units as you're creating these parts. So if you need to make a metric sized valve, make sure you scale that properly using the right units. And then when you define the block, make sure the block units are millimeters. And that's going to tell the software when you go ahead and place that part in the model, from your part palette, it's going to actually scale it properly. If I were to just leave this, as inches, and then I put it into a metric catalog, when I bring that valve in, it's going to be scaled way off. So same thing could happen, vice versa, Imperial to metric. So be sure to check that as you're creating the components. And then you also set that when you go ahead and create the catalog component as well. So when you go in here and select custom AutoCAD block-based graphics, you'll set your units up here and then set your size ranges, and that will keep everything in order for scaling when you go to use those in your project drawings. So just to cover off a couple best practices here for Imperial and metric parts, there is an option to allow you to connect Imperial components to metric components, and that's a checkbox within the project setup options there. If you go in and look at, for example, the mix butt weld, which is a default joint name there, it has a checkbox to allow this joint to connect Imperial and metric components. So there's a little hyperlink here. It'll take you to the help file documentation to kind of explain what that's about. But it's really just allowing you to connect Imperial to metric, and it's not really looking at the units there. So for example, if I wanted to set that, or this is an example of the mixed butt weld in a project drawing, I have CS150 on this side, I'm connecting to the 100HC01 from the DIN catalog on this side. It will pop up a message to say, hey, a connection has been made between Imperial and metric. Two different unit types, but the connection is valid based on that option in project setup. So if you need to connect flange adapters, things like that, make sure you check that, because that will allow you to connect across those two different unit types on the parts. And then looking at the option here for like a mixed metric project, plant size display mode, you can use that on the command line and change the system variable for that, or you can go up on the ribbon bar and there's a little button there that says toggle size display mode. So what that's going to do is actually show you in the property palette the two different unit sizes there. So if I, for example, have a pipe support here, it's actually a 4-inch shoe anchor, and then it's going to put in parentheses the metric equivalent for that. So it's kind of nice to be able to see that, especially on a mixed metric project where you're going through and trying to keep track of both of those units on the parts there. One thing we're putting in here this month are just some blog posts, white papers, things like that go along with this content. And basically this first one here talks about custom blocks and units, just kind of covering the details about creating those block-based parts and the things to remember about the units. There's a white paper here from an Artist University class, and this is going to take you through the whole process of creating block-based parts. So it's a really good guide. There's a handout there that you can download to take you through everything. And then a little bit of troubleshooting these two AKN articles here, Artist Knowledge Network. We'll go through and talk about what happens if the scaling's wrong. Basically, if you have a block-based component that's too large, an Imperial drawing, how you need to go back and scale that and fix the block, and then vice versa. Imperial go into a metric that has the wrong scale, how to go in and fix those. So just want to kind of pause for a moment, see if there's any questions on the chat here, anything that somebody might want to ask live. Maybe you've ran into some issues before with content like this or units, and be glad to answer those for you. And really any of the questions you might have.
There was one question in the chat from Chris Dahl that I answered that had to do with asking about the model coordination module and what level that was at. And it's been 360 design or coordinate, and there's a link in the Q&A with an article on that. So
Yeah, that is, so
No,
that is a separate module that you have to kind of subscribe to get access. All right, let's see if we have anybody in the have to raise their hand here for questions. I don't see anything so far.
nothing in the chat. So
And just out of curiosity, has anybody started to use cloud collaboration on projects yet? Have you had good results of that so far? I know we have a lot of customers that are trying to get people working remotely right now, and a lot of them don't have the ability to just set up SQL servers or Vault or anything like that at other sites. So we've had people switching to that to get project teams up and running lately, especially working remote. It seems to be pretty popular.
you can raise your hand if you want us to take you off of mute. If you don't want to type it all in, I understand.
All right, no questions so far.
Well, good. Well, thank you very much, Jason, for that information.
Oh,
Oops, we got
we have
one that just came into the chat, ready to enter the questions. So,
all right, so this one's about ortho drawing model and this, let's see, create and plant 3D. I just want to read
yes,
through this real quick.
yeah, it looks like that the two different schedule pipes, even though they're the same diameter, rolled up into the ortho bomb together.
Okay. Um, and as far as that's concerned with ortho drawings, it's similar to the ISO bomb as far as the setup. We can take a look at this real quick. Another follow-up question to that, Calvin, would be if you're, I obviously don't have the ability to see your setup there, but as far as the title block and display, I'm assuming you've got that on the orthos where it's another column over there for the schedule and it's just putting them both together, or how's it
Yeah, it
rolling
sounds like the
those?
schedule must be separate from the description, most likely.
Okay, yeah, so that will have to be another one there. Let me just put a bill of material in here. And then if we go to the table setup, so you've got your schedule class. I'm trying to recall, this is something that sometimes happens with ISOs.
I'm sorry, I was going to unmute Calvin there. So,
oh, sure, go ahead.
it looks like Calvin, you're self-muted, so you can unmute if you want to
Oh, can you hear me?
answer that. Yep, you sure can.
Yeah, so I had the schedule class column checked that was enabled, and then inside the spec itself, I had two separate items, one for the schedule 10 and one for the schedule 40. And in the schedule column is where I had filled that information in. And so when I generated my ortho drawing, they showed combined under the schedule 40, or I only had a single line item, and that showed as schedule 40, and the schedule 10 didn't show as a separate line. And what I found for the quantity is that it was adding the lengths of the schedule 10 and the schedule 40 together.
Mm-hmm. So even though you have a schedule column there, it's not using that to isolate or separate out.
Yeah, and I tried a couple different things. I tried having them as like they were separate within the same piping spec. I also tried creating a new piping spec and had the schedule 10 in one and then the schedule 40 in another to see if that would split them out, but that didn't seem to make a difference either. It was still combining them for some reason.
Yeah, I don't think you have to really use the independent column option. That's a little bit different, but I do recall with isometric drawings, they use a similar configuration for the bill of materials as the orthos. There is an XML file that controls some of the grouping, and I wonder if that has to be changed so that it will sort those out as different, because right now it's kind of considering those as the same part type or the same line item, and it needs to split it based on schedule. So maybe that's something we can look into and get back with you on.
Yeah, because it was a grouping. It's called grouping in isometric bombs, but I'm not too sure where it is in the ortho bomb myself.
Yeah, because I don't even know if, I don't think changing the type here is going to really do that, splitting it out by the type of fitting or fastener. It's basically, like you said, Joel, a grouping issue. So let me take a note of that, and we'll put that in as a follow-up item. Ortho XML. Okay.
Thanks, Calvin.
Yeah, definitely a good question there. All right, so I've got a little bit of time here. It had a, this topic didn't quite go an hour this month, so we've got time for Q&A. If anybody has anything else they want to bring up, be glad to go through those with you, or anything that you're curious about for Plant 3D or Bin 360 there. All righty. So I guess if we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and close out for this month. Appreciate everybody joining. There'll be a survey that goes out after this. Encourage you to take that, give feedback, and we will send out, or post the recording, and we'll send out the handout and everything like that, post it on the website for everybody to access later on.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day.